Why don't you guys tell us a little about that weekly schedule or sort of the schedule of creating each episode of Battlestar Galactica back in '78? Because it's so different from how television is made now, and I think people would be interested in that.
Well, it is different because they do adhere to different kinds of schedules. We were so far behind that on a given Sunday, there was a Battlestar Galactica on the tour, and I was going down to a dubbing stage, and I was furious to see all these guys walking around in our costumes, and I was going to get right on the phone. I said, those tour guides. We're trying desperately to get a show on the air, and they're using all our equipment, and they're doing all of these things.
This is at Universal Studios?
This is at Universal Studios, and they said, before you yell at them, it might point out that you might recognize a couple of those tour guys. They're actually the stars of your show. You're shooting on Sundays here. And it was true. We were shooting on Sundays in order to make air dates. That means you're just wheelbarrows of money out the door because everyone gets triple and everything. It's an adventure. I don't know where you begin, but from my perspective, it didn't really start in a quick great idea. Let's have a meeting and maybe we could go do this or go do that. I had a passive interest in science fiction, and I was fascinated by it. But we were handicapped by the fact that almost everybody here in this room has grown up with the realities of space. But when Star Trek was on the air, it did not enjoy the kind of adulation and wonder that these same programs can draw today. First of all, it was considered much less believable, and and each week would feature the monster of the week or the rock of the week, because that's all they had on the set. You couldn't build and you couldn't do all the things we're doing now. But my exposure to it started with radio as a little kid, and along the lines, Battlestar did succeed largely as something you could sell, because between Star Trek and a show I tried to sell to Universal called Adam's Ark, which was about leaving here and going out there to find a place to live. A wonderful project came along called Star Wars, and some of you have probably heard of it. Anyway, it did so many things right and so many things in an entirely different way. And I happened to meet John Dykstra shortly after seeing that picture.
And his role on Star Wars was?
Well, John was a producer as well as, we use the word producers, but his job was help us produce a new universe. We had to create a world in which to do the show, and he and his group all came from Long Beach City College, and he introduced the whole concept of making space look lived in. 2001, everything was pretty slick looking when they were on the ship that took them out to wherever they were visiting, whereas in Star Wars, you started to see hardware that looked lived in, and it looked like, certainly not a tenement, but those ships that had been through the battles. My fascination with the basic themes that became the themes in our show started with a couple of things. One of them was von Daniken's book called Chariots of the Gods. Another was Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods. And they all dealt with the fact that we know so little about our origins. And who are we? Where did we come from? How long have we been around? And it hasn't been very long ago that I asked, are stars, are they like our suns? And people would say, basically no. And they could not prove that there were planets around any of these stars. And only in the last 5 years, If you ever notice the Science Channel, when they show some of these wonderful 2-hour documentaries, they will have been made in 2.9 and 2.8, and when you get back to 2.7 or whatever, they're obsolete because what we're finding out every day eclipses our knowledge. So my interest was not just how do we do a space opera, but where did we come from? Scientists have added up the DNA that we now have in the world, and it doesn't begin to account for the millions and billions of people that have lived on this planet. It just doesn't add up. There's too little DNA. So it speaks directly to the fact that, as the Mayans believe, that there's been 4 complete extinctions of mankind on this planet, and animals and so forth and so on, which everybody's familiar with the demise of the dinosaurs and all of those things. And Hancock's a fabulous scientist who's gone off the coast of India, and because of being able to shoot from space, you can see what used to be a riverbed, and you can see where there are existences, there are peoples and societies that existed on this planet long before the Mayans and the Egyptians. And my fascination was where did they get their knowledge of mathematics and of the stars, if not from previous civilizations that existed here and who may well have come from someplace else. And you can jump into song of there are those who believe that life here began out there. But that really was the foundation, that life here did indeed perhaps start out there. And that got us thinking about the themes, and we were looking around at what was happening, and the innovations of Star Wars and subsequent things, Alien, a lot of other very well-made things, introduced us to the realities and the possibility of really finding out who we are and where we came from. And long-winded introduction, but so it doesn't start with a simple meeting of some kind. It starts with an interest in all of these things, and then maybe you find a project that gives you a chance to pull it all together.